Elias Ward had spent most of his life on lonely frontier planets, where the sky felt wider, the nights felt longer, and trouble always came without warning. He worked as a guide, a guard, and sometimes a mechanic, depending on what the settlements needed. He was used to helping people who were lost, scared, or in danger. But he never expected the night that would change his entire life. The evening was calm at first. The desert wind blew softly, carrying the smell of iron-rich sand. Elias stood on a ridge overlooking the landing fields, checking power lines for the settlement. He lived a simple life, never asking for attention. He preferred staying quiet, staying useful, and staying alone. He believed that staying away from powerful people kept trouble far away. He had no idea how wrong he was. A bright blue light slashed across the sky. It wasn't normal star traffic. Elias narrowed his eyes. The ship was large, elegant, shaped like folded wings of metal. The design was unmistakable Velari Empire. He had never seen such a ship land on a small frontier world like this. He felt something inside him tighten. Velari ships usually brought diplomats, nobles, or high-ranking officers. They never arrived without warning, and they never arrived alone. The ship struggled as it descended, shaking unevenly. The engines flickered. Something was wrong. Elias didn't think. His legs moved automatically. He jumped onto his bike and rode fast across the sand toward the landing zone. When the ship finally landed, it didn't do so smoothly. It hit the ground hard, bouncing once before settling. Elias slid to a stop and sprinted toward the ramp. Before he reached it, the air filled with sharp, angry sounds, blaster fire. Red beams cut through the darkness. He froze for only a second, then dove behind a crate. Shadows ran toward the ship with weapons in hand. Their clothing was wrong, uneven. They were not Velari guards. They were rebels, dangerous ones. Elias didn't know why they were here, but he knew one thing. Someone on that ship was in trouble. He peeked around the crate, counted 6 rebels, then spotted a 7th, moving closer to the ship's ramp. Elias didn't have a weapon strong enough for a direct fight, but he had experience. He grabbed a loose metal pipe lying on the ground, took a deep breath, and moved silently around the crates. The rebel nearest to him didn't notice him coming. Elias struck fast, 1 hit to the arm, 1 to the leg. He didn't use deadly force. He only tried to stop him from firing. The rebel collapsed without screaming, but the others heard the noise. They turned. Elias ran. Blaster beams chased him, burning the sand behind his feet. He ducked behind a crashed cargo pod and checked his surroundings. He needed a plan. Something fast. The ramp of the ship opened slowly, and a figure stepped out. For a split second, Elias forgot to breathe. It was a woman tall, with pale silver skin that shimmered in the desert light. Her dark hair flowed behind her like a storm cloud. She wore a cloak that hid most of her features, but Elias recognized the markings near her neck. Velari royalty. Not just royalty. A queen. Her eyes widened when she saw the rebels. She raised her hands, trying to speak with calm authority, but the rebels didn't want peace. They rushed toward her. Elias didn't wait for her guards. He charged out from behind the cargo pod and tackled one rebel before he reached her. He grabbed another rebel's arm and twisted it, forcing him to drop his weapon. "Get back inside!" Elias shouted at the queen, but she didn't move. Her eyes were full of shock. She had expected her guards to protect her, not a stranger. The rebels regrouped and began firing again. Elias grabbed the queen's arm and pulled her down behind the crates just in time. She stumbled, but caught herself. "You're human," she whispered, surprised by his bravery. "And you're a target," Elias replied, trying to glance around the corner. "We need to move." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Her voice was calm, but shaken. My guards were separated. The rebels disabled our systems. We cannot contact anyone. Then stay close, Elias said. I'll get you out. They moved between the crates, using shadows for cover. Elias noticed she walked carefully, trying not to slow him down. She wasn't helpless, just unprepared for this kind of attack. The rebels circled around, trying to trap them. Elias reached the old maintenance tunnel near the landing pad. He pulled the queen inside, closing the metal door quietly. The tunnel had been abandoned for years, but he knew it better than anyone. It led to his small safe house outside the settlement. As they moved through the dim tunnel, the queen watched him with curious eyes. She seemed unused to relying on someone else, especially someone like him, a man with dusty clothes, calloused hands, and no rank. You fight without fear, she said softly. Why? Because fear slows you down, Elias replied. And slowing down gets people hurt. She studied him a little longer, then asked, What is your name? Elias Ward, he answered. And you? Her lips pressed together for a moment. Then she whispered, Serenia Vela. Elias almost stopped walking. He had heard that name across every broadcast in the galaxy. Serenia Vela, the youngest queen in Velari history. A woman trying to unite her divided people. A leader with a reputation for peace. He couldn't understand why a queen would travel alone to such a dangerous region. But there was no time for questions. When they reached the exit of the tunnel, Elias peeked outside. The coast was clear. He led her to his safe house, a small structure built from scrap metal and stone. Inside, there was only a single bed, a heater, and a table with scattered tools. It's not much, Elias said, lighting a small lantern. But it's safe. Serenia walked slowly around the room, touching the metal walls with gentle curiosity. You live alone? For a long time now, he replied. Less trouble that way. She turned toward him with a soft, thoughtful expression. Tonight, trouble found you anyway. He smiled slightly. Seems like it. Serenia sat on the edge of the bed, still holding her cloak tightly around her. She looked tired, but her posture remained proud. Elias handed her a small cup of warm water. She accepted it with quiet gratitude. After a few moments of silence, she said, You could have run. Many would have. Many would have. I've never been good at running, Elias replied. Besides, they were after you. She lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. They want to stop the peace treaty. They believe I am too willing to trust others. They think unity is weakness. And what do you think? Elias asked. She lifted her eyes, meeting his. I believe peace is worth any risk. My down, the rest properly save. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to speaking with royalty, much less royalty that shared her thoughts openly. As the night deepened, they talked quietly. Serenia asked him about his life, his work, and why he chose to live far from civilization. Elias explained that he once worked with military groups but left after seeing too many people hurt. He wanted to protect, without orders, without politics, without borders. Serenia listened with surprising interest. Most leaders spoke more than they listened. But she asked gentle questions and gave him her full attention. Elias felt something strange comfort, maybe trust something he hadn't felt in years. Outside, the desert winds grew colder. Elias adjusted the heater and handed Serenia a warm blanket. She wrapped it around her shoulders, but kept watching him with thoughtful eyes. You saved my life tonight, she said softly. And you asked for nothing. I don't have much to ask for, Elias answered. She tilted her head. Everyone wants something. Not me, he said, sitting down across from her. Not anymore. They talked until the lantern flickered low. Serenia's eyes grew heavy, and Elias told her she could rest. He sat near the door, keeping watch, ready if the rebels returned. Before she drifted to sleep, Serenia whispered, "When the sun rises, I must return to my people. But before I go, I would like to thank you properly. Tell me how I can." Elias looked away. "Staying alive is enough." Her voice softened, warm with sincerity. When dawn finally touched the horizon, Serenia stood and prepared to leave with her guards, who had finally tracked her location. She looked back at Elias with an expression he didn't fully understand. Part admiration, part sadness, and something deeper. She stepped toward him and said gently, "Tell me where you live. My people will honor you." Elias shook his head with a small, quiet smile. "No need. You're safe now. That's enough for me." Before she could speak again, he slipped out the back of the safe house and vanished into the rising light. She rushed outside, searching the dunes, but he was already gone. Serenia stood in silence, the warm morning wind lifting her hair. She held the blanket he had given her and whispered into the empty desert. 5 years passed. Yet Serenia Vela never forgot the night she spent in the small safe house with the human who had saved her life. The galaxy knew her as a strong queen, a leader who brought peace to divided worlds. But none of them knew about the quiet memory she carried in her heart. She never spoke of Elias Ward, not to her council, not to her guards, not even to the ambassadors who praised her for her courage. The memory felt too personal, too rare, too important. But some nights, when she looked at the stars from her palace balcony, she wondered where he was. She wondered if he was alive, if he found safety, if he still lived like a ghost on the edge of forgotten worlds. She remembered the way he fought without hesitation, the way he spoke honestly, and the way he disappeared before she could learn more about him. That one night had changed her, though no one around her ever understood how or why. After the attack, the rebels who tried to capture her had scattered across the galaxy. Serenia worked hard for peace, and her empire slowly became stronger and more stable. But the rebels still hid in the shadows. Her advisors kept warning her that they might come after her again. But Serenia was not afraid of danger. What troubled her more was the silence, 5 long years, without a single sign of the man who saved her. Elias Ward, however, never expected to be remembered. After leaving Serenia at dawn, he moved farther into the frontier. He didn't want fame, reward, or attention. He only wanted to stay hidden so the rebels would not come after her again. He traveled from planet to planet, taking simple work, fixing machines, guarding settlements, helping miners repair broken reactor lines. Everywhere he went, he used false names, avoiding anyone who asked too many questions. He told himself it was better this way. Better for her, better for him. But deep inside, in the quiet moments, a part of him wished he had stayed long enough to tell her goodbye properly. 1 year passed, then 2. By the 3rd year, he believed Serenia must have forgotten him. She had responsibilities, an empire full of people depending on her. He was just a human guard, with no title and no importance. She had likely returned to her world and moved on. What he didn't know was that she never stopped searching. Serenia instructed her royal trackers to follow every rumor about a lone human with unusual skill. She never said why. She only said, "This person may hold information important to the peace of the empire." Her advisors accepted the explanation, but even they sensed something deeper behind her eyes, something she never admitted aloud. Her trackers searched dozens of worlds. Sometimes they found traces a rebel hideout burned by a skilled fighter, a group of miners saved by a mysterious human, a settlement attacked by smugglers, but protected by someone who left before anyone could thank him. All signs pointed to a man who did good without asking anything in return. But no one could confirm his name. Until the 5th year. On a frozen moon called Etron 6, a disaster occurred. A reactor malfunction threatened to explode, and colonists were trapped inside the facility. Before rescue teams could arrive, someone went in alone. He shut down the overheating coils, carried injured miners to safety, and disappeared before anyone saw his face clearly. But one worker noticed the old tool jacket he wore, the same style worn by frontier mechanics 5 years ago. When Serenia received the report, her heart trembled. Something told her it was him. She didn't need proof. She felt it. Elias had always moved like a shadow, helping in silence, leaving before people could thank him. This was exactly the kind of act he would do. Her advisors begged her not to travel. They reminded her that she was no longer a hidden queen in a cloak, but a ruler watched by millions. But Serenia only spoke one clear sentence. "I will go myself." Her guards prepared the royal ship, but Serenia wanted a smaller one. She didn't want to announce her presence. She didn't want crowds, posters, or reporters. She wanted quiet. She wanted answers. She refused escorts, choosing only 2 guards to follow at a distance, while she traveled alone inside a diplomatic shuttle. The frozen moon was harsh, covered in ice storms and endless snowfields. The air shimmered with cold light, and the wind howled as if the planet itself were grieving. Serenia landed in a remote part of the colony, where a mechanic shelter sat at the edge of a glacier. It looked simple, made of old metal sheets and worn solar panels. She took a slow breath before stepping out. Her heart beat harder than it had during any royal meeting. She walked through the icy wind toward the small shelter. Her fingers tightened around her cloak. For the first time in years, she felt unsure, not as a queen, but as a person who feared disappointment. Inside the shelter, Elias Ward worked on a broken mining drone. He didn't hear her at first. His hands were covered in grease, his clothes old and patched, his hair longer and rougher than before. Yet his movements were steady as always. When the door slid open, he looked up. He froze. The tool slipped from his hand and clattered on the ground. Serenia stood in the doorway, her cloak gleaming faintly under the light. Snowflakes melted on her hair, and her eyes, those same eyes he remembered, watched him with a mixture of relief and disbelief. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Serenia stepped inside and whispered, "I found you." Elias slowly stood, unsure if this was real. He had imagined this moment in dreams, but he always dismissed those dreams as impossible. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low with shock. Serenia's breath was soft, visible in the cold air. "I have searched for you for 5 years." Elias shook his head. "Why?" She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the safe house, direct and sincere. "Because you saved my life," she said. "Because you disappeared without letting me thank you. Because you walked into danger for someone you did not know. And because I wanted to see you again." Elias didn't know how to answer. His chest tightened. For years, he believed he was protecting her by staying away. But now, she was here, standing in front of him, proving he had meant more than he allowed himself to believe. "You're in danger," Elias said finally. "The rebels who attacked you never stopped searching. They want revenge. They want you. And if they find out you're here..." Serenia stepped closer. "They have searched for me for years. They will always search. But I did not come here to run. I came to find the man who saved me." Before Elias could speak again, an alarm beeped sharply on his console. He turned quickly. The scanners detected movement, ships approaching the moon. Not miners. Not traders. The signal code was one he recognized too well. Rebels. A cold breath escaped Elias. They must have tracked Serenia's royal energy signature, even though she tried to come quietly. He looked at her with urgency. "You need to leave. Now." But Serenia shook her head, her expression firm with the strength she had gained as a queen. "I will not abandon you. They're after you," Elias insisted. "And after you." She answered softly. "They never forgot what you did. You saved me that night. You ruined their plan. They want revenge on us both. Elias clenched his jaw. He had expected this day, but he hoped it would never come. He reached for his coat and grabbed a small blaster. Serenia stepped beside him, lifting her own device. She was no longer the inexperienced queen from years ago. She had trained, learned, and grown stronger. The wind outside roared as the rebel ships began landing near the mining site. Elias and Serenia looked at each other. 5 years ago, he had protected her alone. Now, they would stand together. But in Elias's mind, one truth struck harder than the storm outside. He hadn't run away to protect himself. He had run because he was afraid she would forget him, and she had spent 5 years proving him wrong. Elias stood near the window of the small mechanic shelter, watching the rebel ships land through the swirling snow. The frozen wind hit the glass like tiny stones, and the distant shadows of armed fighters moved across the white fields. His heartbeat grew heavier with each second. He had spent years staying hidden, avoiding attention, avoiding his own past. But now the danger had arrived right at his door, and he was no longer alone. Serenia stood behind him, silent but strong, her silver eyes calm even though the situation was dangerous. For a moment, Elias wondered how everything had changed so quickly. 1 minute she stood in his doorway, telling him she had searched for him for 5 years, and the next minute, their past had returned like a storm, ready to swallow them both. He felt guilt that she was here because of him, but also an unexpected sense of relief, because for the first time in years, he wasn't running. Serenia took a slow step toward him. "How many ships?" she asked quietly. "3," Elias replied. "Maybe 4. Hard to see in the storm. But they brought enough fighters to cause real trouble." Serenia nodded, her expression firm. "They tracked me. My royal energy chip is hidden, but not perfect. They must have caught traces when my shuttle entered the atmosphere." Elias turned to face her. "Then we need to get you back to your ship before they surround this area." "No," Serenia said, shaking her head. "You forget they hunt you too. If I leave, they won't stop. They will corner you. They believe you ruined their first plan. Losing me during that ambush made their old leader lose power. They hate you as much as they hate me." Elias looked down, gripping the edge of the table. He had always known the rebels hadn't forgotten. He had sensed danger on every planet he lived on. But hearing it from her made it feel more real, more threatening. "You should have forgotten me," Elias said quietly. "You shouldn't have come. You're a queen. You're important to millions of people. I'm just a—" Serenia stepped closer and placed her hand gently on his arm. "You are not just anything," Elias warned. "You saved my life before your own. You walked into fire for someone you didn't know. That makes you more important than you think." Elias swallowed hard. Her words hit deeper than he expected, but there was no time to respond. The ground outside shook. The rebels had dropped a heavy engine transport onto the snow. They would be ready to march toward the shelter soon. Elias quickly grabbed a small bag and stuffed it with tools and a second blaster. "We're heading to the tunnels," he said. "The same ones I used to hide you years ago. They run under the glacier and lead into the old mining fields. We can lose them in the ice network." Serenia agreed and followed him to the back door. But when Elias opened it, the freezing wind almost pushed him back. A sharp blast of snow cut across their faces. It was difficult to see even a few meters ahead. He looked at Serenia. "Stay close. If you lose sight of me, shout." "I won't lose sight of you again," she said softly. They stepped into the icy storm, walking quickly toward the ridge that covered the entrance to the old tunnels. The snow crunched under their feet, and the cold air stung their lungs. But they kept going. Halfway across the field, Elias paused. He saw something in the distance, dark shapes moving quickly. "They're coming from the east side too," he said. Serenia looked at him with steady determination. "Then we must move faster." They rushed through the snow, climbing over ice rocks and ducking behind ridges. Elias found the hidden door to the tunnel, a rusted metal hatch, nearly covered in snow. He pushed hard, and the door opened with a painful metallic groan. "Inside," Elias said. Sirenia stepped into the darkness without hesitation. Elias followed, closing the hatch behind them. The tunnel inside was cold, but safe from the wind. Their footsteps echoed softly as they moved deeper into the underground passage. Elias turned on a small wrist light, guiding the way. The tunnel walls were rough and cracked, carved years ago by miners. The air smelled of old metal and frozen dust. Sirenia walked behind him, her steps confident. After a few minutes, she spoke again. "You lived here all these years?" "Not in these tunnels," Elias said. "No one except me," Sirenia replied. He stopped walking. The tunnel was quiet. Only the faint drip of melting ice broke the silence. Elias turned slightly and looked at her. Her face was calm, but her eyes were filled with something deep and sincere. "You searched for me all this time?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said. "Every year, every season, every world where we received a rumor. I never stopped." "Why?" Elias whispered. Sirenia took one more step forward. "Because you mattered. You saved me that night. But what stayed with me was not just your courage. It was the kind of person you were. Selfless, honest, brave. You disappeared, not for yourself, but to protect me. How could I forget someone like that?" Elias didn't know what to say. He had lived so long, believing he was invisible. Now he was standing in a tunnel under a frozen moon, hearing that the queen of a major empire had spent 5 years searching for him. Before he could respond, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Rebels. Elias grabbed Sirenia's hand and pulled her deeper into the network. "They're inside the tunnels," he said. "We need to keep moving." The tunnels split into 3 different paths. Elias chose the one on the left, knowing it led to a mining shaft with multiple escape routes. Sirenia ran beside him, never slowing, even in the cold. But the rebels were fast. Soon, the narrow tunnel behind them filled with the hum of blaster energy and footsteps scraping against metal. Elias stopped at a sharp corner and motioned Sirenia behind a thick support beam. Then he crouched and watched the shadows moving closer. The rebels' voices echoed. They sounded confident, certain they had their targets trapped. Elias glanced at Sirenia. "You ready?" She nodded. "Always." As the first rebel turned the corner, Elias fired a quick shot toward the ceiling above him. The ice cracked, and heavy frost fell, blocking the tunnel. Sirenia fired at the tunnel floor, causing a burst of steam to rise. The rebels staggered backward. Elias grabbed her hand again. "Now." They ran through another passageway, breathing hard. This time, they didn't stop until they reached a large chamber filled with abandoned mining cranes. Old machines stood like frozen giants in the dim light. "We can disappear in here," Elias said. Sirenia looked around. Elias didn't answer immediately. He leaned against a metal beam, catching his breath. She came closer, studying him. "Elias," she said gently, "you protected me once, but you don't have to stand alone now. Let me stand with you. We face the same danger." He met her eyes. For the first time, he didn't try to hide his fear. Not fear of the rebels, but fear of losing her again. "You shouldn't be risking your life for someone like me," he said softly. Sirenia stepped even closer, her voice calm but firm. "I choose who I risk my life for, and I have chosen you. I read events. I chosen." The air between them felt warm despite the freezing cold of the moon. Elias felt something he hadn't felt in many years, a sense of belonging. Before he could speak again, the walls trembled. The rebels had found another entrance to the chamber. Elias and Sirenia stood side by side. For the first time in years, Elias realized he wasn't running anymore. He was ready to fight not just for survival, but for the person who crossed stars to find him. And Sirenia, looking at him with steady strength, finally understood something too. The man she searched for 5 years wasn't just a guard who had saved her once. He was someone she didn't want to lose ever again. The mining chamber shook again as the rebels forced their way through a side tunnel. Dust fell from the ceiling and drifted slowly in the cold air like frozen ash. Elias and Sirenia stood together behind an old support beam, listening as the sound of boots grew louder. Elias glanced quickly at Sirenia. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that moment, neither of them felt fear. They felt only the strength they shared now, strength they didn't have 5 years ago when their first meeting changed both of their lives. Elias looked around the chamber, searching for a plan. There were abandoned cranes, old mining carts, hanging steel cables, and piles of unused equipment. Nothing was perfect, but everything could be useful. His mind worked quickly. He pointed to a narrow walkway above them. Sirenia nodded, understanding his silent message. The rebels were expecting easy targets. They would not expect a counterattack from above. Elias climbed the old ladder carefully, making sure the metal didn't creak too loudly. Sirenia followed him with calm, steady steps. Despite the danger, she did not hesitate. She had changed from the quiet, unsure queen he first protected. She had become someone who could fight beside him, someone who trusted him, someone he no longer wanted to leave behind. From the walkway, they could see the rebels entering the chamber below. There were more than Elias expected, almost a dozen. They moved in a tight formation, scanning the shadows with their weapons ready. Elias knew this group. They were loyal to the old warlord, who blamed Sirenia's peace mission for the fall of his power. One rebel shouted, "Spread out, they're here somewhere." The others moved to follow the command. Elias breathed slowly. He had only one small blaster. Sirenia had a compact royal device made for protection, not large battles. But they had something more important than numbers. They had each other. And they had the element of surprise. Elias pointed at a large metal chain hanging above the rebels. Sirenia understood instantly. She aimed her device at the chain's release latch. With a soft pulse of energy, the latch opened, and the chain dropped straight down, hitting the floor with a thunderous crash. The rebels jumped back in shock. Elias used the distraction to fire a shot at the ground, sending sparks across the chamber. The lights flickered, plunging the whole area into half-darkness. The rebels panicked, firing blindly into the shadows. "Move to the left," Elias whispered to Sirenia. "We'll circle behind them." Sirenia nodded. They ran along the walkway silently, keeping low. Elias found another ladder and climbed down quickly. Sirenia followed behind him. They landed behind a pile of scrap metal. The rebels were now confused and separated. They had split into smaller groups, shouting commands at each other, but the storm outside made their voices echo strangely in the tunnel. Elias stepped forward, fired one precise shot into a stack of crates, which toppled loudly and scattered across the floor. The rebels rushed toward the noise. Sirenia raised her device, creating a brief flash of light. Not dangerous, just blinding. The rebels stumbled, unable to focus. Elias ran forward, pushed a large mining cart with all his strength, and sent it rolling down a slope. It crashed into one of the rebels, knocking him over and causing several others to dive out of the way. The remaining rebels tried to regroup, but Sirenia stepped beside Elias and fired another pulse at the floor, creating a cloud of steam from a broken pipe. The steam swirled around the chamber, hiding them from view. One rebel shouted angrily, "They're playing with us!" Elias whispered to Sirenia, "They're losing patience." "That's good." She looked at him, her breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. "How do we end this?" Elias paused for a moment. He looked at her not as a queen, not as someone he felt unworthy of, but as someone who had crossed the galaxy for him, someone who wanted to stay with him, not send him away. "We end this together," he said softly. Serenya's face warmed with determination. "Together," she agreed. Before they could make their next move, a deafening roar filled the chamber. Another rebel ship had landed outside. The heavy engines shook the ground. More rebels were arriving. The situation was becoming worse. Elias pulled Serenya behind a large mining machine as the chamber entrance glowed with new lights. The fresh group of rebels entered with reinforcements. "We have to get out," Elias said. "If they surround the tunnels, we won't escape." Serenya looked around carefully. "There's another exit. The miners sealed it years ago, but the map I studied showed it near the back of this chamber." Elias nodded. "Then we head there. Stay close." They moved quietly along the far wall, using the steam and shadows to hide. The rebels were too distracted by the mess Elias had created in the chamber to notice them slipping away. They found the old sealed exit, a thick metal plate welded shut long ago. Elias studied it quickly. "I can get this open," he said. "But it'll make noise." Serenya placed her hand over his. "Do it. I'll cover you." Elias used his toolkit to cut through the weakened welds. Sparks flew softly, lighting his focused face. Serenya stood guard, watching the shadows. Her heart beat steadily, but her mind was calm. She was not afraid for herself. She was afraid only of losing Elias again, not to rebels, not to fear, not to distance. The final weld broke with a sharp crack. Elias pushed the door open, revealing a narrow tunnel filled with drifting snow. "Hurry," he said. They stepped inside, pulling the metal door behind them. The tunnel was cold and narrow, but safe. They walked quickly, moving deeper through the ice. The noise of battle faded behind them. At last, they reached a large cavern opening to the outside. A frozen cliff overlooked the valley where Serenya's shuttle was hidden under layers of snow. The storm had grown stronger, but the ship's small beacon still blinked faintly. Elias looked at Serenya. "Your ship is still there." Serenya turned to him with a calm but steady expression. "Come with me." Elias paused. His breath fogged the air. Snow whipped around them. "You know I can't," he said quietly. "Your world, your empire. They don't need someone like me." Serenya stepped closer. "I spent 5 years learning what they need. And I learned something else. Power means nothing without people you trust." She held his gaze firmly. "You are the person I trust most." Elias felt a warmth spread through him, cutting through the freezing wind. But old fears tugged at him. "If I stay with you, the rebels will keep coming. And if you stay alone," Serenya replied, "they will still keep coming. But you will face them alone. Let us face them together." He looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't the same queen he'd met 5 years ago. She wasn't the same frightened leader hiding in a safe house. She was stronger, braver, and she had searched an entire galaxy for him. Before he could answer, a new danger appeared. A rebel ship burst through the storm, heading straight toward them. Elias grabbed Serenya's hand and pulled her behind an ice formation as blaster shots tore through the snow. "They found us," Serenya whispered. "Then, let's finish this." They stood shoulder to shoulder, firing back from behind the ice. Elias used the cliff's height to his advantage, guiding the shots to bounce off the ice. Serenya used her device to create temporary shields. The rebels struggled in the storm, their shots scattered by the wind. Elias found the right moment and fired at the ship's wing. It sparked, dipped, and crashed into the snow below. The rebels inside scrambled out. But Serenya sent a controlled pulse at the ground near them, causing the snow to collapse and trap them harmlessly. At last, the valley grew quiet. Elias lowered his blaster. Serenya lowered her hand. It was over. She turned to him, her breath trembling from the cold and the relief. Elias looked at her as if seeing her for the first time not as a queen, but as someone who had believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. Serenia stepped closer. Now, you must choose. Elias's voice was low. Choose what? Return to hiding, Serenia said softly, or walk with me into a future where you don't have to hide from anything. Not from the rebels. Not from your past. Not from me. Elias felt his heart ache with a strange mix of fear and hope. For years, he had convinced himself that he had no place beside her, but she had proven him wrong every step of the way. He finally spoke. I'm tired of running. A gentle smile touched her lips. Then stay. Then stay. Elias stepped closer until the cold wind faded around them. I'll go with you, he said softly. Wherever you go. Serenia's eyes warmed. For the first time in 5 years, she felt whole. They walked together toward the shuttle, hand in hand. When they entered the ship, Serenia sent a message to her council. The man who saved my life stands with me now. He will never stand in the shadows again. Across the galaxy, people whispered in awe. And on that frozen moon, 2 lives once separated by fear, silence, and distance finally returned to the same path.